In a new interview with the New York Times, comedian Chris Rock caused quite a stir on social media. He said that Pelosi and House Democrats were too focused on impeachment during the pandemic.
So Team Rising is back with Democratic strategist Andrew Feldman and Washington Examiner's Tom Rogan to discuss Rock's remarks and the fallout that ensued. Andrew, let's start with you. I know you were a big impeachment supporter. So what Rock essentially says here is that he's basically like compares Trump to a 5-year-old child emperor. And he's like, yeah, the 5-year-old child emperor is going to be the 5-year-old child emperor. But the Democrats were focused on impeachment all while there was this pandemic that was also entering the United States. And he was, Crystal, I think you have the exact quote where he's like.
So he says, Republicans tell outright lies. Yeah. Democrats leave out key pieces of the truth that would lead to a more nuanced argument. In a sense, it's all fake news. Your thoughts, Andrew?
Look, I think this actually does kind of sum up how a lot of people feel about politics these days. But what I can tell you is, first of all, the impeachment was not going on at any point in time when the virus was here in the United States, and President Trump was talking to Bob Woodward on February 7th about the seriousness and deadliness of the virus, and then telling the public something else.
Actually, that's not true, Andrew. Let me just stop you there. February 5th was the final vote on impeachment. The travel ban on China was January 31st. So that was at the very beginning of all this was happening.
Okay, and I would still point back on February 7th, Donald Trump told Woodward how deadly this virus was, and then still refused to talk about it. And at the same time, Nancy Pelosi and House Democrats reached a deal in March on coronavirus, and they passed the HEROES Act in May that would have given relief to so many more thousands and millions of Americans across this country, and Republicans and Mitch McConnell won't even pass a deal right now. And here's what we're looking at, Sagar and Crystal. We're looking at hundreds of thousands of airline workers losing their jobs on October 1st. So I would tell you that I don't disagree that there should have been a deal by now. I don't disagree that Democrats, in a lot of ways, should have negotiated a bit more off of their position to get a deal done for working Americans. That hasn't happened, but I do not compare, where Republicans are on this and Democrats. But I do believe that we need to move and come together to get a deal done, because hundreds of thousands of workers are about to lose their jobs.
Tom, let me get your reaction to Rock's characterization of President Trump. He infantilizes him. He compares him to a 5-year-old emperor. And he's like, come on, guys. We know that it's like a 5-year-old. He's not really in charge. But he also said this thing. He said, part of the reason we're in the predicament we're in is the president is a landlord. No one has less compassion for humans than a landlord. And we're shocked that he's not engaged, which I thought was kind of spot on.
Well, I would suggest on that play that private landlords tend to provide a better measure of service than some of the public housing landlords in places like New York City.
I forget you're such a capitalist sometimes.
But in terms of, look, I'm a big fan of Chris Rock as a comedian. Yeah. There is obviously President Trump's temperament. Yes, perhaps it's slightly unconventional in terms of his penchant for viewing things through a personal prism. But, when we note what was going on the Hill in terms of the difficulty of negotiations, some of Speaker Pelosi's more recent comments, the national discourse perhaps is not at the level of, Jefferson and Adams at the moment. And I think that is, in some sense, well, it's negative, but broadly there's a positive there, because everyone's eyes are on the election. The country is still a democracy chasing votes. So for all the silliness, there is a positive here, and ultimately people in November will get to render their verdict on it one way or the other.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, let me just press you a bit more on that. What I think Rock was getting at, which is an under-discussed idea that impeachment might have interfered with the business of the country ahead of the pandemic. I generally accept that to be true, which is I don't think Washington can chew gum and walk at the same time over and over again. That's kind of been revealed. And to me, what was hilarious was the freak out at Rock for suggesting such a premise. What do you think about the core premise itself?
No, I mean, I think that's true. And I think it was interesting. The freak out is interesting, as you suggest, because I think it reflects the idea that Hollywood celebrities are supposed to say things that are singularly negative about Trump without a greater degree of nuance. And if they don't, the Twitter brigade comes storming after them. And so, so that's why it's kind of amusing and why I guess I hope he doubles down on it.
Yeah. What did you think of that aspect, Andrew? Because that to me is, I remember, who was it? Maggie Haberman maybe, that went on and said like something mildly critical of Biden on CNN a while back, and everyone freaked out. Every time we have Michael Moore in the show today, every time he goes on MSNBC, people melt down because he says Trump could possibly win. It worries me because if Biden does win the presidency, we keep hearing like, okay, just hold your fire. And then once he wins, that's when we're really going to hold his feet to the fire. But like, do you think that they're ever going to allow any criticism of Biden or the Democrats whatsoever without being like, oh my God, you're enabling fascism. What are you doing?
Yes, I don't think the Twitter brigade is real life. And I think we need to remind everyone of that. But I do think, look, our democracy is at risk. Seriously, I can't tell viewers that enough. And our way of life is at risk. So if we do not get Donald Trump out of office now, the country as we know it is in a lot of trouble. That is why it is so critical not to, where we're seeing Democrats freak out when people attack our nominee, because it doesn't help us win in November. Once we win, absolutely, let's hold his feet to the fire. Progressives, let's get on the front lines right away and demand what the change you want to see. But right now, if Donald Trump doesn't get out of office, none of that is going to be possible.
So basically lie if it justifies helping get Trump out of office?
No, I'm not saying lie. Absolutely not. I don't think that's the right frame at all. I just think that what Donald Trump is doing and saying is a risk to lives across this country, our economy.
But here's the other, I get everything you're saying, Andrew, and I view it the same way, frankly. But here's my thing is, from day one with Donald Trump, all that anyone in the Democratic Party and in CNN and MSNBC and New York Times, like every story, the end of the story is Trump is bad. And if that is your frame of literally everything, people don't listen to you. Just as a strategy, like even if we're just completely Machiavellian, we're saying our whole goal is to get Donald Trump out, is anyone who's persuadable going to listen to the people who just every day say the same thing about every single story? It doesn't land. I mean, this is why we've seen like the needle hasn't moved on him whatsoever in terms of his approval rating, in terms of how the base feels about him whatsoever, because there isn't a level of honesty. People have bought into this idea that it's better to be propagandists and never say anything negative about the Democrats because, oh my God, we could give our enemies a talking point, than to actually be honest about the situation. And then you have credibility when you do say negative things about Donald Trump.
Look, I would say that when you see a top aide to Vice President Pence and someone on the coronavirus task force come out and leave the administration and do a video like she did yesterday, that's pretty compelling stuff. And
it would be compelling if it would be, you know what, Andrew, it would be compelling if we didn't hear the same rhetoric every single day from Democrats from day one and from the media from day one. And that's the thing is like, why do you think that it doesn't land anymore?
From messaging, we have to really say the same points over and over and over to make sure it gets in people's heads. That's the reality.
But when you're not honest, about the flaws on your own side, people don't believe you, don't have any credibility. That's the reality.
That's right. And we're going to find out in 46 days whether saying it over and over again actually worked. We're running out of time, gentlemen.
Gentlemen, thank you. Great to see you both.
See you, Tom. Thank you.
Coming up, Real Clear Politics outlined Trump's possible path to re-election. We're going to discuss when Rising returns.